There's something wrong.
The Avengers.
Marvel's most unpredictable team is finally here, but is Thunderbolts 2025 a masterpiece or a missed opportunity? Stay till the end for shocking facts, hidden details, and my honest review with no spoilers. You're watching Kali Facts, where every movie has a secret waiting to be uncovered. Thunderbolts is a 2025 American superhero movie based on Marvel Comics and the Thunderbolts team. It was made by Marvel Studios and released by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. This movie is the 36th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe (MCU). It was directed by Jake Schreier, with the script written by Eric Pearson and Joanna Carlo. The movie features a stacked cast, including Florence Pugh, Sebastian Stan, Wyatt Russell, Olga Kurylenko, Louis Pullman, Geraldine Viswanathan, Chris Bauer, Wendell Pierce, David Harbour, Hannah John Carmen, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. The story follows a team of anti-heroes who get caught in a dangerous setup and have no choice but to work together. Even though they all come from different backgrounds and have their own personal issues, they're forced to team up for a mission that pushes them to face the painful parts of their past. As the mission gets more intense, they realize they're dealing with way more than they expected, and they have to learn to trust each other if they want to make it out alive. Marvel Studios first started teasing the idea of a Thunderbolts team back in 2021. Fans quickly picked up on the hints, and excitement started building. In June 2022, Marvel officially confirmed that the movie was in development, with Jake Schreier directing and Eric Pearson writing the script. A few months later, in September, the main cast was announced, and more actors joined the project over the following months. By March 2023, Lee Sung-jin came on board to rewrite the script. He had already worked with Jake Schreier on Netflix's hit series Beef, so bringing him in made a lot of sense. However, the movie hit a major speed bump because of the 2023 Hollywood writers and actors strikes. Production got delayed, and a few casting changes happened in early 2024. Around that same time, Joanna Carlo joined the writing team to help polish and improve the script even more. Filming finally kicked off in February 2024 and wrapped up in June of the same year. Most of the movie was shot at Trilith Studios, and Atlanta Metro Studios in Atlanta, Georgia. The production team also traveled to Utah and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to film several scenes on location, giving the movie a bigger and more realistic feel. Thunderbolt had its world premiere on April 22nd, 2025, at Cineworld Leicester Square in London, England. It officially hit theaters across the United States on May 2nd, 2025, serving as the final movie in the Phase 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. One thing that had fans talking for months was the little asterisk Gotchi at the end of the movie's title. Marvel kept the meaning a secret during the marketing campaign, which led to all kinds of fan theories and online discussions. By the end of the movie, the mystery was finally revealed. The Thunderbolts team is officially renamed the New Avengers. Because of that big reveal, the movie title changes to the New Avengers during the end credits. And Marvel even started using that new title in some of the marketing after the movie came out. The movie got mostly positive reviews from critics and fans. A lot of people praised how it handled mental health in a more honest and emotional way than most superhero movies. Florence Pugh and Louis Pullman received a ton of praise for their performances, with many calling them the standout stars of the film. Thunderbolts also picked up several award nominations and recognition for its performances and storytelling. Even though the reviews were strong, the movie didn't do as well as Marvel had hoped at the box office. It ended its theatrical run with about 382.4 million worldwide, making it one of the lower grossing MCU movies despite the positive buzz. The movie kicks off with Yelena Belova, a highly trained Black Widow assassin, sneaking into a secret laboratory for another dangerous mission. She's working for Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, the director of the CIA, who orders her to collect important research and destroy everything connected to a secret experiment called Project Sentry. Inside the lab, one of the scientists desperately tries to warn Yelena that Valentina is hiding something much bigger than she realizes. Before he can explain everything, a fight breaks out. During the struggle, the scientist accidentally kills himself, leaving Yelena with even more questions than answers. She completes her mission, blows up the lab, and reports back to Valentina. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Bucky Barnes, also known as the Winter Soldier, has left his life as an assassin behind and is now serving as a US congressman. He's helping investigate Valentina, who is accused of secretly running illegal experiments through the OXE group while leading the organization. Lawmakers believe OXE has been creating enhanced humans through dangerous and illegal testing. Valentina refuses to back down. She argues that after recent global disasters and with the Avengers no longer around, someone had to step up to protect the country. She insists that every decision she made was for America's safety, even if her methods were questionable. At the same time, Yelena visits her father figure, Alexei Shostakov, better known as the Red Guardian. These days, Alexei lives a much quieter life running a limousine business, but he still tries to lift Yelena's spirits. She's emotionally exhausted from years of dangerous missions and still hasn't recovered from losing her sister, Natasha Romanov. Wanting a fresh start, Yelena tells Valentina she'll accept one last mission before leaving fieldwork for good. Instead of rewarding her loyalty, Valentina betrays her. She secretly sends Yelena to an underground OXE facility called the Vault. At the same time, she also sends John Walker, US agent, Ava Starr, Ghost, and Antonia Dreykov, Taskmaster, into the exact same location. Each of them believes they're there to eliminate a single target, but they soon realize the real target is each other. A huge fight breaks out as everyone attacks at once. In the middle of the chaos, Ghost unexpectedly kills Taskmaster with a single shot. Before anyone can understand what's happening, they discover an ordinary looking man named Bob Reynolds who has no memory of how he ended up inside the facility. The exits suddenly lock, trapping everyone underground. It doesn't take long for Yelena Walker, Ghost, and Bob to figure out the truth. Valentina never intended for any of them to survive. She wanted to erase every piece of evidence connected to Project Sentry, including the people who had worked for her. As they search for a way out, Ghost powers stop working because the building is protected by special technology designed to block her abilities. Working together, the group disables the system and barely escapes before the facility begins destroying itself. During the escape, Yelena accidentally touches Bob's hand and is suddenly overwhelmed by painful memories from her childhood training in the Red Room. She relives one of the darkest moments of her life before snapping back to reality. It becomes clear that Bob has strange powers that can somehow connect people to their deepest memories. The team keeps searching for an exit but soon realizes they're trapped deep underground. Bob suggests an unusual escape plan, and by working together, they slowly climb a massive vertical shaft. Along the way, each person begins experiencing painful memories after coming into contact with Bob, revealing that everyone carries emotional scars from their past. While all of this is happening, Valentina attends a high profile event, believing her plan is working perfectly. However, security footage reveals that Yelena, Walker, Ghost, and Bob are still alive, and now they're actually working together. Even more surprising, facial recognition identifies Bob as the only surviving subject from the mysterious Project Sentry, a man everyone believed had died years earlier. Realizing how valuable Bob truly is, Valentina sends armed mercenaries to capture him alive while eliminating everyone else. The group manages to sneak past several guards by disguising themselves, but they're eventually discovered. To help the others escape, Bob steps out into the open and draws all the soldiers' attention toward himself. The mercenary fire countless bullets at him, but nothing happens. Everyone watches in shock as Bob survives every attack without a single scratch. Moments later, Bob discovers he can actually fly. He shoots high into the sky but loses control of his powers, falls back to Earth, and crashes with incredible force. Valentina quickly captures him before anyone else can reach him. Seeing Bob's unbelievable abilities, Valentina decides to use him as the face of a brand new superhero. She believes introducing him to the public as humanity's next great protector will save her reputation and stop her impeachment. Meanwhile, Yelena, Walker, and Ghost escape into the desert, where Alexei finally catches up with them in his beat up limousine after secretly tracking Valentina's operation. Together, they flee while being chased by heavily armed mercenaries. At the same time, Bucky Barnes learns the truth from Valentina's assistant Mel, who secretly decides to help expose her boss. Bucky intercepts the group, intending to bring them in as witnesses against Valentina. Back at Valentina's headquarters, Bob wakes up and is convinced that his incredible powers can make him the world's greatest hero. But those closest to him know something is wrong. His records reveal a history of severe mental instability, raising fears that giving someone like Bob unlimited power could lead to disaster. After learning the full truth, Bucky joins forces with Yelena, Red Guardian, Walker, and Ghost. The unlikely group officially comes together, later jokingly calling themselves the Thunderbolts, a name inspired by Yelena's old childhood soccer team. United for the first time, they race toward Valentina's headquarters, ready to stop her before Project Sentry creates a threat even greater than anyone imagined. The Thunderbolts finally come face to face with Valentina and Bob, who is now wearing a powerful new suit and officially becomes Sentry. Valentina proudly reveals her master plan. She wants to use Sentry's incredible powers to create a new age where she controls how America is protected. In her mind, she is the only person capable of deciding what's best for everyone. The team immediately attacks, hoping to stop Sentry before it's too late. But they quickly realize they're completely outmatched. Every punch, weapon, and attack barely affects him. Sentry easily defeats all of them without breaking a sweat. During the fight, he even rips Bucky's vibranium arm right off, proving just how unbelievably powerful he has become. Knowing they can't win, the Thunderbolts retreat. But then something unexpected happens. Sentry starts questioning why he should listen to Valentina at all. With all his new power, he no longer believes he needs anyone giving him orders. As he prepares to kill her, Mel suddenly arrives and activates a special emergency device that knocks Sentry unconscious before he can finish the job. While Valentina and Mel escape, something terrifying begins happening to Bob. Darkness slowly surrounds his body, and his hidden personality finally takes over. This dark side is called the Void, a terrifying version of Bob created from all of his depression, fear, trauma, and self hatred, made even stronger by the Sentry experiment. Outside, The Thunderbolts feel completely defeated. They believe they failed because they were never meant to be real heroes in the first place. Everyone starts going their separate ways until Alexei catches up with Yelena. She finally opens up about everything she's been hiding. She admits that her life feels empty. She has no real purpose outside of dangerous missions. She's still carrying the pain of losing Natasha, and she's been trying to numb everything with alcohol. Instead of judging her, Alexei reminds Yelena that she's stronger than she believes. He tells her that her past doesn't define who she is and encourages her to stop seeing herself as nothing more than a weapon. His words help give her hope again. Just then, people all over New York begin looking up at the sky. Sentry has completely transformed into the void. Using his terrifying powers, he covers the city in total darkness. One by one, innocent people are turned into shadow like figures as fear spreads across the streets. The Thunderbolts quickly reunite and begin helping civilians however they can. But it soon becomes clear that fighting the void with physical force isn't going to work. Yelena realizes there's only one chance to save Bob and everyone else. She willingly steps inside the darkness to reach him. Inside the void, Yelena finds herself trapped inside a world built from painful memories. She relives moments from her childhood in the Red Room, including one of the darkest experiences of her life. Instead of running away this time, she pushes through the painful memories until she finally finds Bob. Bob appears as his normal self, sitting alone inside one of his memories. Yelena witnesses the abuse he suffered as a child. His father treated him terribly, and even when Bob tried to protect his mother, she blamed him instead. As they move deeper through his memories, they also confront his struggles with addiction, emotional pain, and the terrible experiment that turned him into Sentry. Yelena realizes she made a mistake earlier when she encouraged Bob to bury his feelings instead of dealing with them. Now she understands that hiding pain only allows it to grow stronger. She tries to convince Bob that he doesn't have to fight his emotional battles by himself. Soon, the rest of the Thunderbolts enter the void to help. However, Bob's dark side mocks him and easily overpowers everyone. Bob tries fighting the void with anger, but that only makes it stronger because violence is exactly what it feeds on. Instead of throwing another punch, Yelena does something completely different. She walks through the chaos and simply hugs Bob, reminding him that he isn't alone anymore. One by one, the rest of the Thunderbolts join in. Their support and friendship finally reach Bob, helping him break free from the void's control. As Bob regains control of himself, the darkness disappears and New York returns to normal. After everything is over, Bob has no memory of what happened while the void was in control. The Thunderbolts head straight for Valentina, ready to hold her responsible for everything she caused. But Valentina is always thinking one step ahead. Before they can expose her, she calls a huge press conference and tells the world that forming this team was her plan from the very beginning. She proudly introduces them as the world's newest team of superheroes, the New Avengers. The crowd celebrates the announcement, leaving the Thunderbolts shocked by how quickly she turns the situation in her favor. Yelena quietly reminds Valentina that if they're officially the new Avengers now, then she works for them, not the other way around. Later, Alexei visits a grocery store and proudly discovers that the new Avengers are featured on a box of Wheaties cereal. Excited by the moment, he tries getting another shopper to recognize him as one of the heroes, but nobody pays much attention, making the scene both funny and awkward. 14 months later, the new Avengers are still trying to earn the public's trust. Some people fully support them while others remain skeptical. Even Sam Wilson, the new Captain America, challenges the team over their right to use the Avengers name. At the same time, Bob continues living under strict supervision because everyone fears that using his powers again could bring back the void. Just when things seem to settle down, the team receives an urgent warning from space. Their monitoring systems detect a mysterious spacecraft entering Earth's atmosphere. As they zoom in on the incoming ship, they notice a giant number 4 painted on its side, teasing the arrival of an even bigger chapter in the Marvel Universe. Florence Pugh, as Yelena Belova. Florence Pugh steps into the role of Yelena Belova with a performance that anchors the entire ensemble of Thunderbolts. As the adoptive sister of Natasha Romanoff and a product of the Red Room's brutal training program, Yelena arrives in this film carrying the accumulated weight of loss, isolation, and unresolved trauma. Pugh first introduced the character in Black Widow, where she portrayed a young assassin newly freed from mind control and navigating a fractured family dynamic. She returned in the Disney Plus series Hawkeye, driven by grief and a desire for answers surrounding her sister's death. In Thunderbolts, that grief has settled into something quieter and more corrosive, and emptiness that Yelena herself struggles to name. Poe has described the character as someone who has been fundamentally altered by recent events in the MCU, particularly Natasha's sacrifice in Avengers Endgame. Rather than dwelling solely on the past, the film positions Yelena in a leadership capacity, forcing her to confront whether she can still function as the reliable presence others lean on when everything falls apart. Pugh's performance leans into dry humor and emotional vulnerability in equal measure. Scenes in which Yelena articulates her loneliness, sitting alone, scrolling through a phone, replaying every terrible act she has committed, land with startling honesty. The actress brings a lived in quality to the Russian accent and physicality, making the character feel simultaneously lethal and exhausted. Outside the MCU, Pugh has built a career defined by range and intensity. Roles in Lady Macbeth, Midsommar, Little Women, Oppenheimer, and Dune Part 2 established her as an actress capable of both quiet devastation and larger than life presence. That versatility serves Yelena well. The character's early sequence in Kuala Lumpur, involving a high stakes free fall from a skyscraper, required Pugh to perform the stunt herself, underscoring her commitment to the physical demands of the role. Later, when Yelena enters the void to reach Bob's consciousness, Pooh navigates layers of memory and shame with a precision that elevates the film's exploration of mental health. Violet McGraw reprises her role as young Yelena in flashback sequences, providing continuity with the character's origin and reinforcing the sense that the adult Yelena is still carrying the child who once believed she could protect others simply by standing in goal. Pugh's chemistry with David Harbour's Alexei Shostakov remains one of the film's most compelling relationships. The surrogate father daughter dynamic, first sketched in Black Widow, receives deeper examination here. Yelena's frustration with Alexei's bluster coexists with a genuine need for connection, and Pooh plays both the irritation and the underlying affection without sentimentality. By the film's end, Yelena's quiet assertion of power over Valentina Allegra de Fontaine signals a character who has found a new purpose within a makeshift family, even if that family remains deeply imperfect. Sebastian Stan as Bucky Barnes, Winter Soldier Sebastian Stan returns as James Buchanan, Bucky Barnes, the former Winter Soldier who has transitioned from brainwashed assassin to elected member of the United States House of Representatives. Stan has portrayed the character since Captain America, the first Avenger, evolving him through Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, and the series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. In Thunderbolts, Bucky occupies a unique position as both participant and observer. He is tipped off about Valentina's schemes by her assistant Mel and initially intends to bring the surviving operatives in as witnesses for the impending impeachment proceedings. Stan's performance emphasizes Bucky's very pragmatism. The character has spent decades as a weapon and is now attempting to operate within institutional systems that remain fundamentally broken. Co-writer Eric Pearson originally conceived Bucky as a political lobbyist engaged in propaganda work, only for Kevin Feige to suggest elevating him to congressman. The change allows Stan to explore a man who understands the machinery of power yet remains skeptical of it. When Bucky joins the group in infiltrating the Watchtower, Stan balances the character's tactical competence with a dry, almost reluctant sense of responsibility toward the chaotic ensemble around him. Comparisons have been drawn between Bucky in this film and Jack Nicholson's Randall McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a figure entering a disordered environment and gradually uniting its members through sheer force of personality and shared purpose. Stan's work is understated but essential. He provides a steadying presence amid the more volatile personalities of John Walker and Alexei, while his own history of trauma and redemption gives him unique insight into Bob's fractured psyche. Outside the MCU, Stan has earned critical acclaim for roles in I, Tonya, The Devil All the Time, A Different Man, and The Apprentice, the latter earning him an Academy Award nomination. That dramatic range informs the quieter moments of Bucky's arc, particularly when the Void forces the team to confront their darkest memories. Wyatt Russell as John Walker US. Agent Wyatt Russell reprises the role of John Walker, the former Captain America candidate who received an other than honorable discharge after the events of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. In that series, Walker's attempt to fill Steve Rogers' shoes ended in violence and public disgrace. Thunderbolts finds him working as one of Valentina's operatives, still carrying the super soldier serum and the psychological scars of his fall from grace. Russell plays Walker as a man who desperately wants to be seen as a hero yet cannot fully escape the aggression and insecurity that defined his earlier actions. The character's dynamic with the rest of the team is frequently antagonistic. Yelena dismisses him as a dime store Captain America, and Walker's tendency toward bravado creates friction with Bucky's more measured approach. Yet, Russell also locates vulnerability beneath the posturing. When the group is forced to confront their pasts inside the void, Walker's memories of failure and the consequences of his choices surface with uncomfortable clarity. Gabrielle Bindlos returns as Walker's wife Olivia, grounding the character in a personal life that exists beyond the costume and the shield he no longer carries. Russell's background as a former professional hockey player informs the physicality he brings to the role. Outside the MCU, he has appeared in 22 Jump Street, Everybody Wants Some, the Black Mirror episode Playtest Lodge 49, Under the Banner of Heaven, and Monarch Legacy of Monsters. That mix of a comedic timing and dramatic intensity allows him to navigate Walker's mixture of arrogance and genuine desire for redemption. By the film's conclusion, Walker has begun to function as part of a team rather than a lone operator seeking individual glory, a subtle but meaningful shift in the character's trajectory. Olga Kurilenko as Antonia Dreykov. Taskmaster Olga Kurilenko returns as Antonia Dreykov, better known as Taskmaster, the scarred assassin whose photographic reflexes allow her to mimic any fighting style she observes. Introduced in Black Widow as the daughter of General Dreykov and a living weapon controlled by the Red Room, Antonia was freed from her father's influence only to find herself without purpose or identity. In Thunderbolts, her role is brief but decisive. Sent by Valentina to the same facility as Yelena, Walker, and Ghost, she becomes the first casualty of the trap when Ava Starr kills her during the ensuing fight. Kurilenko's physical performance remains impressive even in limited screen time. The character's mask and combat style are instantly recognizable, and the actress conveys a lifetime of conditioning and isolation through movement alone. Outside the MCU, Kurilenko is known for Quantum of Solace, Oblivion, The Death of Stalin, Extraction 2, and numerous action and dramatic roles. Her presence in Thunderbolt serves as a reminder of the human cost of Valentina's operations and the disposable nature of the operatives the Contessa recruits and discards. Louis Pullman as Robert Bob Reynolds Sentry. Void Louis Pullman makes his MCU debut as Robert Bob Reynolds, a former drug addict and the sole surviving subject of OXE Group's Project Sentry, injected with an experimental version of the super soldier serum. Bob develops powers that reportedly exceed those of the entire Avengers roster combined: flight, invulnerability, super strength, telekinesis, and more. The same procedure amplifies his existing mental health struggles, giving rise to the Void, a shadowy alter ego that embodies depression, insecurity, and destructive impulse. Bullman's performance is the film's emotional and thematic centerpiece. As Bob, he is gentle, confused, and almost apologetic for the chaos that surrounds him. As Sentry, he becomes a golden, godlike figure whose delusions of superiority alienate him from those trying to help. As the void, he is a force of pure negation, capable of trapping people inside their worst memories and spreading supernatural darkness across New York City. The actor navigates these three facets with remarkable control, never allowing the character to become a simple split personality trope. Instead, Bob's struggle feels continuous, one man trying and often failing to hold the darker parts of himself at bay. Director Jake Schreier has noted that the Void's visual design was inspired by the shadows left after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, while Bob's mental health arc drew from personal experiences close to the filmmaking team. Pullman himself has spoken about the pressure of portraying a character often described as Marvel's most powerful and most dangerous. The actor's previous work in Top Gun, Maverick, where he also played a character named Bob, Bad Times at the El Royale, Outer Range, and lessons in chemistry prepared him for the dual demands of vulnerability and spectacle. Young Bob is portrayed by Clayton Cooper in flashbacks that reveal an abusive childhood and the origins of Bob's addiction and self loathing. The climax of the film hinges on the Thunderbolts entering Bob's psyche and affirming their belief in him. Pullman's ability to shift from terror to tentative hope in those final moments gives the sequence its emotional weight. The character's future within the MCU remains open, but Pullman's performance ensures that Bob's Centre Void will be remembered as one of the more complex and human introductions in recent Marvel history. Geraldine Viswanathan as Mel Geraldine Viswanathan plays Mel, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine's idealistic and increasingly conflicted assistant. Mel was a high school student when the Avengers first assembled and entered the workforce with genuine optimism about doing good within powerful institutions. Viswanathan portrays the character as someone whose moral compass is constantly tested, by the pragmatic ruthlessness of her boss. Mel's decision to tip off Bucky Barnes about the events at the OXC facility becomes a pivotal plot point, and her use of a failsafe kill switch on Bob triggers the emergence of the Void. Viswanathan brings a natural comedic timing and emotional transparency to the role, creating an effective foil to Julia Louis-Dreyfus's more calculating Valentina. The actress has previously appeared in Blockers, The Broken Hearts Gallery, Cat Person, Drive Away Dolls, and the series Miracle Workers. Her work in Thunderbolt suggests a character who may continue to navigate the gray areas of power and conscience in future MCU projects. David Harbour as Alexei Shostakov. Red Guardian David Harbour returns as Alexei Shostakov, the Soviet super soldier known as the Red Guardian and Yelena's adoptive father figure. Harbour first played the character in Black Widow as a blustering, self-aggrandizing former operative living in the shadow of his own legend. In Thunderbolts, that same larger-than-life personality is tempered by genuine concern for Yelena's well-being. Alexei overhears details of Valentina's plot while working as a freelance chauffeur and subsequently rescues the surviving operatives, providing both comic relief and unexpected emotional support. Harbour's performance leans into the character's theatricality while allowing quieter moments of paternal instinct to surface. The scenes in which Alexei tries to comfort a broken Yelena rank among the film's most affecting. Harbour has spoken about the complex relationship between the two characters. Yelena cannot stand Alexei's ego, yet she needs the sense of family he represents. Outside the MCU, Harbour is best known for Stranger Things, with additional credits in Hellboy, Violent Night, Gran Turismo, and A Working Man. His ability to balance bombast and vulnerability makes Red Guardian an essential part of the Thunderbolts' dysfunctional chemistry. Hannah John Kamen as Eva Star. Ghost Hannah John Kamen reprises her role as Eva Star, also known as Ghost, the quantum phasing operative first introduced in Ant-Man and the Wasp. In that film, Eva's molecular instability left her in constant pain and desperation. Thunderbolts presents a version of the character who has gained greater control over her powers and approaches combat with calm precision. John Kamen has noted that the film allows Ghost to operate from a place of decisiveness rather than perpetual crisis. Eva's willingness to kill Taskmaster during the facility fight establishes her as one of the more pragmatic and lethal members of the group. Her ability to phase through solid matter proves repeatedly useful, and her presence adds a layer of quiet intensity to the ensemble. John Kamen's previous work includes Killjoys, Ready Player One, Tomb Raider, and various television roles. In Thunderbolts, she continues to refine a character whose powers and trauma have always been intertwined. Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. Julia Louis-Dreyfus delivers a career highlight performance within the MCU as Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. the CIA director, and OXE group chairwoman whose schemes drive the plot, first appearing in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and later in Black Widow and Black Panther. Wakanda Forever, Valentina has spent years recruiting damaged operatives for her own purposes. Thunderbolts finally places her at the center of the narrative, revealing both her ruthless ambition and the childhood trauma that shaped her. Louis-Dreyfus plays Valentina as a woman addicted to power and terrified of losing it. Her greatest weakness, the actress has observed, is the loss of control. When the void forces Valentina to relive the death of her father, the carefully constructed persona cracks, exposing the open wound beneath. The performance balances sharp comic timing, honed through Seinfeld and Veep, with genuine menace and unexpected vulnerability. Chiara Stella portrays young Valentina in the flashback sequence, completing the portrait of a character who learned early that power is the only reliable form of safety. By the film's end, Valentina's attempt to rebrand the Thunderbolts as the new Avengers and claim credit for their actions is both cynical and shrewd. Yelena's quiet warning, "We own you now," suggests that the Contessa's grip on the situation is no longer absolute. Louis Dreyfus ensures that Valentina remains one of the MCU's most compelling and unpredictable players. Supporting cast and ensemble dynamics beyond the principal players. Thunderbolts features a deep bench of supporting performers who enrich the world. Chris Bauer appears as Holt, a security officer for the OXE group. Wendell Pierce plays Congressman Gary, a resolute figure determined to see Valentina impeached. Eric Lang portrays Houston, while Alexa Swinton appears as Anya. Additional roles include reporters, soldiers, family members of Bob and Walker, and various operatives who populate the film's action sequences. The casting of Thunderbolts reflects a deliberate choice to assemble performers capable of carrying both spectacle and emotional complexity. Florence Pugh and Louis Pullman provide the film's dual emotional cores. Sebastian Stan, David Harbour, Wyatt Russell, and Hannah John Kamen supply distinct textures of trauma, ego, and resilience. Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Geraldine Viswanathan embody the institutional machinery that seeks to use and discard these broken people. Olga Kurilenko's brief appearance underscores the human cost of that machinery. Each actor brings a specific history, both personal and within the MCU, that informs the group's uneasy alliance. The result is an ensemble that feels lived in and specific rather than interchangeable. The casting choices allow Thunderbolts to explore themes of mental health, found family, and the search for purpose among those the larger heroic community has written off. In doing so, the film demonstrates that the strength of an MCU project often rests not only on the characters themselves, but on the carefully selected performers who inhabit them. Thunderbolts 2025 production, release, and reception, production, development, and pre production, the roots of a Marvel Studios film, built around a team of morally compromised operatives stretch back further than most fans realize. While making Guardians of the Galaxy in the early 2010s, director James Gunn floated the idea of eventually adapting the comic book team known as the Thunderbolts, a rotating roster of former villains and anti-heroes who pose as champions. Studio president Kevin Feige saw promise in the concept, especially once Guardians proved that lesser known characters could carry a blockbuster. Gunn's enthusiasm cooled by 2021, however, after he directed the Suicide Squad for the rival DC Extended Universe. He felt the DC team was built on essentially the same premise, and pursuing both would have been redundant. Around the same period, actress Hannah John Kamen said publicly that she would welcome the chance to bring her Ant-Man and the Wasp character Ghost into a Thunderbolts lineup, noting that the comic book version of the character was already an established member of the team. Real speculation that Marvel intended to build toward a Thunderbolt style team inside its cinematic universe began in 2019 when it was announced that Daniel Brühl would reprise his Captain America Civil War role as Helmut Zemo for the Disney Plus series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Zemo is one of the architects of the Thunderbolts in the Source comics, so his casting fueled online theorizing. That same series introduced Julia Louis-Dreyfus as the scheming CIA operator Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, who was shown recruiting Wyatt Russell's John Walker, and Desfontaine's reach extended further still when she appeared in the post-credits scene of 2021's Black Widow alongside Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova. Commentators reasonably guessed she was assembling a team of anti-heroes. Behind the scenes, however, executive producer Nate Moore later explained that the studio never seriously considered folding a Thunderbolts storyline into the Disney Plus series itself, arguing that doing so would have crowded out the character work already planned. Head writer Malcolm Spellman acknowledged the online chatter about the team's eventual arrival, but said he wasn't sure if the fan speculation was justified. It was screenwriter Eric Pearson, fresh off his work on Black Widow, who actually pitched Marvel Studios on a Thunderbolts film. Pearson recognized that Florence Pugh's Yelena had the screen presence and narrative potential to anchor a movie in her own right, describing her as a natural leader whose confrontation with DeFontaine could drive an entire story. Because he wanted the film centered on Yelena, Pearson built the roster outward from her personal relationships and unresolved plot threads. He included her adoptive father, Alexei Shostakov, Red Guardian, and pushed to include Ghost, a character he had long wanted to write. Bucky Barnes joined the ensemble a few drafts later. The team eventually solidified as Yelena Shostakov, Ghost, Barnes Walker, and the assassin Antonia Dreykov, Taskmaster, with the amnesiac Bob Reynolds added shortly afterward, a lineup that then remained fixed through subsequent rewrites. In assembling this group, the creative team looked across the MCU's back catalog for characters who lived in moral gray areas rather than simple villains who could be redeemed or heroes who had been derailed by circumstance. Pearson later compared the character dynamic between Yelena and Barnes to Michael Corleone and Tom Hagen from Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Some candidates didn't make the final cut. Early drafts included Bill Foster, also known as Goliath, continuing the rapport he had built with Ghost in Ant-Man and the Wasp, with a plan for him to formally join the team by the film's end. Pearson ultimately cut Foster because the character lacked the shared undercurrent of trauma that tied the other Thunderbolts together thematically. Director Jake Schreier, once attached, likewise pushed to include the swamp creature Man Thing during his pitch process. But writers found that the character's unpredictable, visually distinct presence pulled focus away from Bob, who needed to be the story's emotional and narrative center. That idea was dropped once Marvel found another use for Man Thing elsewhere. Schreier came aboard as director by June 2022, hired on the strength of a pitch presentation that reportedly impressed Marvel's executives considerably, with Pearson's script and Pike producing. At the time, Marvel had already been quietly checking on the availability of several previous MCU cast members to gauge interest in reprising their roles. One idea that survived from Schreier's earliest pitch through to the finished film was the notion that the team members would be sent on a mission with secret orders to eliminate one another, a premise Schreier felt offered a clever subversion of audience expectations that they were simply getting Marvel's answer to Suicide Squad. Pearson agreed it was important not to simply replicate the authority figure forces criminals to cooperate structure that audiences had already seen in both the 2016 Suicide Squad and Gunn's 2021 sequel. For that reason, the writers deliberately avoided leaning on Zemo or Thaddeus Ross, the characters who lead the team in the comics, despite Schreier's personal interest in incorporating Zemo somehow. The two writers discussed whether including either character could be justified narratively rather than as simple fan service, and ultimately decided against it. One abandoned idea had Zemo appearing in a prison set post credits scene, manipulating events from behind bars in a nod to Kevin Spacey's antagonist in The Usual Suspects. But the concept was quickly discarded. Marvel formally unveiled the project at San Diego Comic-Con in July 2022, announcing a release date of July 26, 2024, and slotting it as the closing film of the MCU's Phase 5. Trade reporter Justin Kroll described the project that September as effectively a spin-off vehicle for Yelena, anticipating Pooh and Russ would return alongside Grohl. Days later, at the D23 Expo, Marvel confirmed the ensemble: Pugh, Russell, John Kamen, and Louis-Dreyfus, joined by Sebastian Stan as Barnes, David Harbour as Red Guardian, and Olga Kurilenko as Taskmaster, all actors reprising roles established in earlier MCU films or series. Pugh's deal reportedly guaranteed her an eight-figure sum covering this film and one additional MCU project. Before the roster was locked in, some commentators had speculated the team might include Emil Blonsky, Abomination, or Clint Barton, Hawkeye, neither of whom ultimately joined. To describe the tone he was chasing, Schreier repeatedly pointed to films about mismatched groups forced into uneasy alliances. Reservoir Dogs, Ronin, and Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, and more unexpectedly cited Toy Story 3 as a touchstone, observing that, like the Pixar film's cast of toys, the Thunderbolts were all characters staring down their own obsolescence. Harbour framed the ensemble as a group of misfits who fell well short of traditional superhero polish, while Pooh enjoyed that the characters fundamentally didn't get along, and Russell predicted the finished film would feel looser and less conventional than a typical Marvel release. Industry journalist Jeff Snyder reported around this time that Pearson's early drafts leaned too heavily on characters connected to Black Widow, the film he had also written, prompting Marvel to push for a more genuinely ensemble driven balance among the cast. Schreier pushed back on the idea that the film was simply a Black Widow sequel, describing it instead as a cross section of characters pulled from different corners of the MCU's history, even while acknowledging the writers drew heavily on the Yelena Shostakov relationship first built in that 2021 film. One draft opened with Yelena directly confronting DeFontaine over being sent to kill Hawkeye, tying back to plot threads from Black Widow's ending and the Hawkeye miniseries. Pearson ultimately felt the scene, while useful for illustrating DeFontaine's manipulative streak, didn't serve the larger story and was cut. Casting continued to fill out in January 2023 when Ayo Edebiri joined as DeFontaine's assistant Mel. Around the same time, Louis-Dreyfus indicated that filming was expected to begin that June. The following month, Steven Yeun was cast as Bob Reynolds' Sentry, with the studio reportedly interested in building the character into future MCU appearances. Yoon had previously worked with Schreier on the Netflix series Beef, and the director specifically had him in mind while developing the role. In March 2023, Beef creator Lee Sang-jin came aboard at Schreier's request to rework the script, citing the film's thematic richness as a draw. Though he noted that, unlike the collaborative writers' room approach on Beef, this project belonged fundamentally to Schreier and required a different creative process, given its scale. With the roster largely locked, Schreier used these later drafts to deepen supporting characters existing on the margins of the plot, such as Mel and Congressman Gary, tying their arcs more tightly into the film's emotional through line. Production hit its first real obstacle in May 2023 when the Writers Guild of America strike forced a delay to filming. which the studio expected to resume once the strike concluded. The following month, Marvel pushed the release date back to December 20, 2024, and Utah's State Film Office confirmed that a portion of the shoot would take place in Emery and Grant counties, representing an investment of more than $4, 5 million in the local economy. Then studio chair Bob Chapek described the project as a grounded globe spanning production that would lean on practical locations, with Utah selected for landscapes that felt untouched by modern civilization. Costume designer Sanja Milkovich Hayes, who had previously dressed Captain Marvel and Spider Man No Way Home, joined the production around this period. When the subsequent SAG-AFTRA strike ended that November, the release date slipped again, this time to July 25, 2025. The extended pause gave the writers room to revisit the script, and they didn't like what they found. Returning from the strikes, Schreier and his collaborators concluded the story lacked genuine tension or unpredictability. There was no real sense watching it that any given character might not make it to the end. The fix was structural. They reworked Taskmaster's arc so that she would be killed early and abruptly, ensuring her death carried weight and shaped how audiences read the stakes for everyone else. The team considered killing her off later in the story instead, but Schreier felt that pushing her death toward the climax would cast a pall over the film's back half and distract from what needed to be the story's true emotional spine, the bond forming between Yelena and Bob. In Pearson's earlier draft, Taskmaster had survived to the end, developing a friendship with Ghost along the way and repeatedly forgetting, due to her own memory issues, that she'd stopped trying to assassinate Walker, a running joke. Pearson later admitted he understood being cut since it echoed Bob's own memory loss arc too closely. That draft also included a post-credits appearance by the time-traveling villain Kang the Conqueror, scrapped once Marvel Studios decided to move away from that storyline altogether following changes elsewhere in its release slate. Once filming was rescheduled for roughly March or April 2024, Steven Yeun exited the project that January, citing a scheduling conflict created by the accumulated delays, though he expressed openness to a future MCU role. It briefly wasn't clear whether Marvel would recast the part or rework it entirely, but by the end of the month, Louis Pullman had emerged as the studio's preferred replacement, and his casting as Sentry was soon confirmed. Around the same time, Geraldine Viswanathan stepped into the role of Mel after Edebiri exited due to the scheduling shifts. That February, Marvel moved the release date forward again to May 2, 2025, trading release slots with the Fantastic Four first steps. By the end of that month, Joanna Callow had joined the writing team to continue reworking the script during production itself. When final writing credits were assigned, Pearson received story credit and a shared screenplay credit with Kahlo, while Lee Sung-jin was credited for additional literary material. Thematically, the finished screenplay leans heavily into questions of mental health, specifically isolation and depression, filtered primarily through Bob's arc. Pearson said he had always envisioned the story building toward a moment where the resolution came from offering someone a hug rather than throwing a punch. Before Sentry was folded into the plot, Walker had actually been envisioned as the film's chief antagonist. Desfontaine would have convinced him his super soldier enhancement was failing and supplied him with pills as a supposed remedy, gradually turning him into an unstable threat. Pearson later conceded that this version of the story never quite clicked, partly because it echoed the arc of Thaddeus Ross transforming into Red Hulk in the same year's Captain America. Brave New World, a storyline Pearson had, in fact, floated using himself before Marvel declined it to preserve those plans for the other film. Searching for a villain the Thunderbolts genuinely couldn't defeat through combat alone. Pearson recalled the Sentry Comics miniseries from years earlier and recognized that Sentry's alter ego, the Void, could dramatize the tension between heroic ambition and self loathing. He described Sentry as embodying the entire emotional journey of the Thunderbolts distilled into a single character, which helped the whole story cohere. Pearson was pleased. He was able to preserve much of the character's comic book backstory while adapting it for the screen, though one plot beat, Sentry erasing himself from the world's collective memory to contain the void was deliberately avoided because it echoed the amnesia driven plot of Spider Man No Way Home. Paul Jenkins, the character's co creator in the comics, consulted with the filmmakers, and Schreier came to see Jenkins's original work with Sentry as effectively a parable about mental illness. Schreier credited Lee with recognizing that mental health storytelling had become mainstream enough that the film could explore real interiority while still delivering the comedy and scale audiences expect from a summer blockbuster. As the roster solidified, individual cast members spoke publicly about how they were approaching characters who, in several cases, had appeared only briefly in earlier MCU installments. Foos described Yelena as someone visibly worn down by the accumulated trauma of recent MCU events, most notably the death of her adopted sister Natasha Romanoff during Avengers Endgame. Pearson clarified that while the loss of Romanoff informed Yelena's emotional state, the writers deliberately avoided dwelling too heavily on that backstory, preferring instead to push the character forward into a genuine leadership position within the group. Fu said she was genuinely surprised by the script's reveal that the team would eventually be rebranded the New Avengers and came to see that unexpected sense of belonging as something that was effectively keeping Yelena alive, giving her a found family structure that depended on her and let her feel loved again after years of isolation. Actress Violet McGraw returned in a small role as a young Yelena, reprising the part from 2021's Black Widow. Stan's Bucky Barnes underwent his own quiet transformation for this film, having been elected to the US House of Representatives sometime between his prior MCU appearances and this story. Pearson said Barnes was originally conceived as something closer to a political lobbyist, one who appeared to have compromised his principles to help other politicians manipulate public opinion. A portrayal designed to look like a fall from grace, until later scenes reveal he had actually been quietly investigating De Fontaine the whole time. After Pearson's work on the script concluded, Fage suggested reworking Barnes specifically into a sitting congressman rather than leaving him in a vaguer political role. Stan, drawing his own comparison, likened Barnes's position within the ensemble to Jack Nicholson's Randall McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, describing both characters as outsiders parachuted into a chaotic, dysfunctional group that badly needed someone to unify it. Russell's John Walker carried forward his history as a decorated U.S. Army Ranger captain who had briefly served as Captain America's government sanctioned successor before receiving a dishonorable discharge in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Kurilenko's Antonia Dreykov, known in combat as Taskmaster, retained her established backstory as a scarred assassin with photographic reflexes capable of mimicking any opponent's fighting style, a power originally forced on her by her father before Natasha Romanoff freed her in Black Widow. Pullman, playing the amnesiac Bob Reynolds, had recently portrayed a different character, also nicknamed Bob in Top Gun. Maverick and jokingly asked Schreier whether his new character could go by Robert instead to avoid repetition. Schreier explained the name carried real significance in the comics, and Pullman said he warmed to it over time. Schreier based much of Bob's psychological arc on the real experiences of a close friend, and later said the visual design of the void, a figure wreathed entirely in shadow, was directly inspired by photographs of the shadows left behind after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Harbus said the film deepened the prickly, complicated father daughter dynamic between Shostakov and Yelena, first sketched out in Black Widow, observing that although Yelena can barely stand to be around her adoptive father, she still needs him to feel like she has a complete family unit. John Carmen described her return as Ghost as an opportunity to show a very different side of the character than the one introduced in Ant-Man and the Wasp, no longer suffering from constant molecular instability and instead able to control her powers with calm and precision. Louis-Dreyfus, reprising Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, described the character bluntly as someone chasing power and control above all else, calling exploring her backstory a welcome surprise. A sequence involving the void, in which De Fontaine relives witnessing her own father's death, gave Louis Dreyfus a chance to play the character as raw and momentarily powerless. A young version of Defontaine appears in that flashback, played by Chiara Stella. Viswanathan, who plays Defontaine's assistant Mel, said she connected with the character's internal conflict between youthful idealism and the harder realities of actually trying to do good from inside a compromised institution, noting that Mel had been in high school when the Avengers first assembled back in 2012. The film's most distinctive sequences, the so called shame rooms, the team must pass through inside the Void's realm, originated with executive producer Brian Chapek, who proposed that defeating Sentry would require the Thunderbolts to enter the void itself and confront manifestations of their deepest personal shame. Lee worked closely with production designer Grace Yun, a fellow Beef alum, to design the specifics of each space. Pearson had initially pictured these sequences as dreamlike and ethereal, but the team ultimately modeled them after the disorienting, maze like environments of being John Malkovich. Feeling that approach made the concept more visceral and unsettling. Kahlo pushed the idea further by suggesting that when Yelena enters the void to rescue Bob, she should find herself back in the very shame room she experienced earlier in the film, a deliberate echo meant to underscore the idea that the character's greatest shame was believing she could be something bigger than herself, and that healing meant accepting she actually was. The finished film visualizes shame rooms for Yelena, Walker, and Defontaine individually, while rooms belonging to the rest of the ensemble were reserved for the climax, allowing the whole team to escape together through them. Kahlo felt strongly that the story needed one unmistakable turning point before the team journeyed toward the heart of the void. So the group's passage runs specifically through Bob's own shame rooms. Those spaces depict Shostakov's imprisonment in a Soviet gulag, Ghost's isolated childhood, in an orphanage where no one wanted her around, and several vignettes tied to Bucky, including an intentionally understated, almost mundane humiliation from his time in the Boy Scouts, deliberately pitched below the audience's more dramatic expectations. The title itself became one of the production's more unusual creative decisions. During his original pitch, Schreier suggested that a poster or trailer use an asterisk after the word Thunderbolts, implying the team still needed to find something better to call itself. Feige, Marvel co-president Louis D'Esposito, and the marketing department embraced the idea enthusiastically, and the film was formally retitled Thunderbolts by March 2024. The asterisk gimmick also gave the filmmakers a mechanism to reveal an entirely new title once the movie was released, which they exploited by changing the film's name to The New Avengers once the story reveals the team's rebrand. Schreier said the ending, the team being unveiled as the New Avengers, had been fixed from the start, with the rest of the script constructed to earn that final beat. Pearson explained that Feige was the one who proposed that De Fontaine should introduce the Thunderbolts to the public specifically as the Avengers, which then led to extended internal debate over details as small as whether the word new should be capitalized and what that stylistic choice implied. The film seeds a handful of small clues pointing toward this ending well before it lands, including a gala referencing the Battle of New York, the transformation of Avengers Tower into the Watchtower, and a line from Mel establishing that she was still in high school when the Avengers first assembled. The credit sequence and post credit scene both acknowledge in story that the new Avengers name is an imperfect fit for this particular group of characters. The Thunderbolts name itself notably originated from Yelena's childhood soccer team. Beyond the central mystery of the title, the writing team spent considerable effort grounding the film's political backdrop in something more specific than the usual vague government conspiracy setup common to spy inflected superhero stories. DeFontaine's arc as a CIA director facing possible impeachment gave the screenplay a through line rooted in institutional self preservation. Her decision to send four operatives into a facility with secret orders to eliminate one another is framed not as villainy for its own sake, but as a cold, bureaucratic solution to a public relations problem of her own making. Congressman Gary's dogged pursuit of her impeachment and Bucky Barnes's own position as an elected official investigating her from inside the same institutions. Let the writers thread a light satirical edge about political image management through what is otherwise a fairly straightforward espionage plot. The OXE group, the shadowy organization behind the Sentry experiment, was constructed specifically as a deniable extension of DeFontaine's authority, an operator designed to produce a weapon she could control and later present to the public as a hero, insulating her from blame if the project ever failed. Pearson and his collaborators wanted this backdrop to feel plausible enough to carry real stakes without tipping the film into a straightforward political thriller, keeping the emphasis squarely on the ensemble's internal dynamics rather than on procedural detail about Washington. Filming principal photography was originally slated to begin in mid June 2023 and run for roughly 6 months, and Marvel had initially hoped the writers' strike wouldn't disrupt the shoot at all. The plan was reportedly to film whatever material was ready and handle further script adjustments during previously scheduled reshoots. That plan collapsed once the strike, followed by the SAG-AFTRA strike, forced the production to actually halt. The delay had knock-on effects for Sebastian Stan in particular. He had been simultaneously preparing to play Donald Trump in The Apprentice, for which he had gained weight and had already begun the physical transformation required to play the leaner Bucky Barnes when the strikes hit, forcing him to reverse course on his training. David Harbour, meanwhile, had planned to shoot this film concurrently with his role as Jim Hopper on the fifth season of Stranger Things, both based in Atlanta. A plan complicated further because the Stranger Things production was itself delayed by the same strikes. Filming finally began around February 26, 2024, based at Trilith Studios and Atlanta Metro Studios in Atlanta, Georgia, under the deliberately silly working title Oops, All Berries, a nod to the all berry variant of Cap'n Crunch cereal. Andrew Drost Palermo served as cinematographer, having previously shot the Marvel Studios series Moon Knight. He replaced Steve Yedlin, who had originally been attached to the project. The production was shot for IMAX presentation, a choice consistent with the studio's broader push to capture as much of the film's imagery in camera and at the highest possible resolution rather than relying on digital up conversion during post production. From May 29 to June 12, 2024, the crew relocated to Emery and Grant counties in Utah for location work, taking advantage of the region's remote, sparsely populated terrain to stand in for the story's more isolated, off the grid settings. Louis-Dreyfus had completed her scenes by early June and told reporters that Marvel Studios was consciously trying to return to a more grounded filmmaking approach, emphasizing the character's humanity, practical stunt work, and minimizing digital effects wherever feasible. Schreier pushed for the film's fight choreography to feel as tactile and realistic as possible throughout, with one deliberate exception: the climactic confrontation between the Thunderbolts and Sentry atop the former Avengers Tower, now rebranded the Watchtower. Both Schreier and the stunt team wanted that specific sequence to visually communicate the sheer scale of Sentry's power, which required weeks of rehearsal and meticulous choreography involving Pullman and his stunt double, Alec Back. Pullman later described the fight as a rare, contained showcase. Essentially, the film's one real opportunity to demonstrate exactly what Sentry is capable of. The production also traveled internationally, filming at Medan Pasar Square and the Merdeka 118 skyscraper in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. One of the shoot's more notable stunts involved Pugh insisting on performing without a stunt double the sequence in which Yelena leaps from the top of Merdeka 118. Marvel was initially reluctant to allow it for insurance reasons, but after Pooh persisted, including appeals directly to Feig, she was cleared to do the jump herself. For the sequence depicting Yelena's journey through the shame rooms to reach Bob, Palermo opted for a handheld, deliberately rough hewn visual style, drawing inspiration from small, intimate films such as Being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and A24 productions like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Feig pushed the crew to achieve as many effects as possible practically and in camera rather than relying on post production work. And Schreier said the team liked the idea of literally, physically staging what it might feel like to be trapped inside a recurring, inescapable thought. Principal photography wrapped during the week of June 19, 2024. Two additional cast members were revealed that September. Chris Bauer, cast as the OXE Group Security Officer Holt, and Wendell Pierce, cast as the impeachment minded Congressman Gary. That same month's teaser trailer credited Scarlett Johansson, who had played Natasha Romanoff throughout the MCU's first decade, as an executive producer, a credit she later asked to have removed after clarifying she had no actual involvement in the production. Early December brought a round of additional photography in Atlanta, including work on the memorably titled Meth Chicken Shame Room sequence built from one of Bob's fractured memories. Post-production editing duties fell to Harry Yoon and Angela Catanzaro. Yoon had cut Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings for Marvel and had also worked with Schreier previously on Beef, giving him a working shorthand with the director heading into a large-scale studio production. Visual effects were overseen by supervisor Jake Morrison, with the workload distributed across a large roster of houses: Industrial Light and Magic, Framestore, Digital Domain, Rising Sun Pictures, Renault VFX, Base FX, Crafty Apes, and Mammal Studios all contributed to the finished film. Beyond the reshoot work folded into principal photography, the film's post-credits scene had an unusually collaborative origin. Set 14 months after the main story, it shows the newly rebranded New Avengers being alerted to an extra-dimensional spacecraft entering their reality, later identified outside the film itself as belonging to an alternate universe version of the Fantastic Four. Schreier revealed that this scene was actually shot roughly a month before Thunderbolts does release on the set of the in-production Avengers Doomsday, directed by Anthony and Joe Russo, who were the ones who physically filmed the sequence. Schreier himself was present on set that day. He described conceiving the scene as an opportunity to hand the characters off into a much larger canvas and said he enjoyed watching them directed by different filmmakers operating on a different scale than his own production had used. Pearson believed Kahlo was the one who ultimately wrote the scene's dialogue. An earlier cut of the sequence had included a bit where Barnes and Walker traded a rapid fire "who's on first" style exchange, confused over the numeral 4 emblazoned on the approaching ship. Stan later called the bit genius and was disappointed it didn't survive the edit, while Russell compared the tone of the exchange to a Leslie Nielsen sketch. Splitting visual effects work across 8 separate houses reflected both the scale of the production and the studio's stated preference for grounding as much of the film as possible in practical photography, reserving the heavier digital work for sequences that genuinely required it. Chiefly the widespread of supernatural darkness across Manhattan, the physics defying combat during Sentry's confrontation with the team at the Watchtower, and the more abstract, dreamlike transitions between the film's various shame rooms. Industrial Light and Magic, and Frame Store, both longtime Marvel collaborators, handled major portions of the film's large scale New York City sequences, while smaller specialist houses contributed targeted effects work, including digital environment extensions, crowd simulation for the scenes of civilian trapped in the void's darkness, and cleanup work supporting the production's practical stunt photography. Editors Yoon and Catanzaro faced the additional challenge of cutting a film whose script had been reworked multiple times across a production delayed by more than a year, requiring them to reconcile footage shot under different drafts of the screenplay with material added during the December 2024 additional photography session. Reviewers who commented on the finished film's pacing and structure generally credited the editing team with successfully stitching together a story that had passed through an unusually turbulent development process without visible seams. Music band Sun Lux began recording the film's score at Abbey Road Studios in London during the first week of February 2025. Band member Ryan Lott had a prior connection to Schreier, having composed the score for the director's earlier feature Paper Towns, and that relationship carried over into his selection for this much larger project. A soundtrack album collecting Sunlux's score was released jointly by Hollywood Records and Marvel Music on April 30, 2025, arriving just ahead of the film's theatrical debut. The scoring choice continued a pattern within the MCU of pairing genre adjacent or independent minded musicians with studio tentpoles, and it dovetailed with the film's broader visual and tonal ambition, voiced repeatedly by cast and crew during the marketing run, to feel closer to an intimate character piece than a conventional effects driven superhero picture. Sun Lux's involvement fit naturally with the production's stated goal of grounding its most surreal sequences, including the shame room passages inside the void, in something that felt handmade rather than purely synthetic. The band, known primarily for genre blending work outside the studio blockbuster space, brought a texture to the score that several reviewers later cited as part of what distinguished the film's tone from a more conventional orchestral Marvel score, particularly in scenes depicting Bob's fractured psychology. Recording at Abbey Road placed the project in the same storied studio space used for a long line of prior Marvel scores, giving Lott and his collaborators access to a full live orchestra to pair with the band's more electronic and textural instincts. The decision to release the soundtrack album 2 days ahead of the film's American theatrical debut followed a now standard Marvel Studios and Hollywood Records rollout pattern, giving audiences and press an early listen before the film's wide release. Reviewers who commented on the music generally folded it into broader praise for the film's sound design and atmosphere, particularly during the shame room sequences where the score's more unsettling dissonant passages were frequently mentioned alongside the visuals as reinforcing the film's psychological stakes rather than simply underscoring action beats in a conventional way. Released theatrical long before the film reached audiences, its unusual title generated its own wave of publicity. After production got underway in March 2024, Pew and Marvel Studios released a behind the scenes video in which she showed off her updated Black Widow style costume alongside Schreier, revealing an updated logo styling the title as Thunderbolts. Coverage of the clip varied. The rap's Kristen Lopez predicted fans would immediately begin picking apart the brief footage, while Gizmodo's Sabina Graves found the video charming, highlighting Pooh's shorter haircut and a joking aside with Schreier about oversharing footage. Collider's Chris McPherson focused on the costume itself, describing it as tactical and military inspired, and noted Pugh's teal eyeliner as a detail. Commentators quickly zeroed in on the asterisk itself, questioning why it had appeared at all. The following month, Feige confirmed Thunderbolts as the film's official title and said the reasoning behind the punctuation would be explained once the film was released, a statement that only fed further speculation. One popular theory held that the on screen team wouldn't actually go by the Thunderbolts name at all, guessing instead at something like the Dark Avengers or New Avengers. Another theorized that a separate Thunderbolts roster, closer to the comics, existed elsewhere in the MCU. A first look at behind the scenes footage screened at Cine Europe in June 2024, and actual footage from the film debuted the following month at San Diego Comic Con, presented by Schreier and members of the cast. Harbour notably attended dressed as Red Guardian. After unauthorized leaks of that Comic Con footage circulated online, Marvel folded an official look at the team into a video celebrating the studio's 85th anniversary that August. A teaser trailer followed a month later, set to the Pixies' Where Is My Mind? Tom Power, writing for Tech Radar, felt the teaser was a cleaner, higher quality version of the previously leaked footage and came away impressed with what he'd seen, highlighting both the characters' struggles with identity and the trailer's tone and action beats. Mary Kate Carr of the AV Club focused on the mysteries the marketing was deliberately withholding, chief among them the meaning of the asterisk, describing the teaser as effectively refusing to reveal any real plot information. A second trailer premiered during Super Bowl Live X in February 2025, which many observers felt confirmed that the void Bob's destructive alter ego would be the film's central threat. The same trailer featured Red Guardian joking about the team's hopes of eventually appearing on a box of Wheaties, the cereal famous for its breakfast of champions branding and history of featuring star athletes. Marvel tied a poster campaign to that joke, designing artwork that mimicked an actual Wheaties box and captioning related social posts, The Breakfast of Champions Thunderbolts. A companion international poster leaned further into the title's central gag, including a mock footnote explaining the asterisk as meaning the Avengers are not available. Karen Fisher at Film wondered aloud whether the line was purely a joke or an actual hint at the film's plot. Gizmodo's James Whitbrook and IGN's Scott Collier both read the gag as consistent with the film's broader marketing posture, presenting the team as a scrappy, self aware, comedic outfit rather than as a genuine piece of the story's central mystery. The marketing campaign took an unexpected creative turn in March 2025 when the film review platform Letterboxd debuted its own trailer for the film, cut in the visual language of trailers for small independent films distributed by A24. The trailer gave the Marvel Studios logo an A24-esque makeover, set techno music underneath the footage, and included title cards spotlighting past A24 credits held by members of the cast and crew. Schreier was involved in shaping the trailer, which arrived around the same time Pew described the finished film to press as an indie, A24 flavored assassin movie that happened to star Marvel superheroes. Polygon's Zosha Millman observed that Marvel was clearly courting film enthusiasts with the stunt, but predicted the movie itself would still land as a fairly conventional entry in the studio's catalog. A24 hadn't been given advance notice of the trailer and responded with a wry social media post referencing its HBO series Euphoria. Later that same month, Marvel announced that a large number of MCU actors, including Stans, Russell, Pugh, Pullman, Harbour, and John Carmen would be reprising their roles for the studio's upcoming crossover event, Avengers Doomsday, because Thunderbolts' marketing had leaned into uncertainty over which characters might survive its story. The timing of the announcement drew scrutiny. Some felt it effectively confirmed which characters would live through the film, aligning with existing speculation that Taskmaster would die relatively early given her limited presence in trailers. Nerdist's Michael Walsh was particularly critical, arguing the announcement undercut one of the film's central selling points, genuine uncertainty about which characters might not survive, and compared the misstep to spoiling which soldiers live through the dirty dozen. He argued Marvel should have simply left the Thunderbolts cast out of the Doomsday announcement until after release. IGN's Amelia Emberwing took a more forgiving view, arguing that knowing who survives rarely matters much in an ongoing comic book franchise, and noting the returning actors could plausibly be playing alternate universe versions of their characters given the multiverse's role in the broader MCU. Fan screenings took place across 10 major American cities on April 22nd, 2025. Toward the end of that month, Marvel announced a tie-in with Wheaties, producing a limited edition cereal box, mimicking the poster artwork from earlier in the campaign. Altogether, the marketing spend for the film was estimated at between $75 million and $100 million, and the campaign included brand partnerships with Harley Davidson, Tide, Wheaties, Mike and Ike, Cupra's hero model, in partnership with Formula E Racing, LinkedIn, Perfect Sports, and the Arizona Beverage Company. Thunderbolts held its European premiere on April 22nd, 2025, at the Cineworld Leicester Square in London, followed by a Los Angeles premiere on April 28th. The film opened in the United States on May 2nd, playing in IMAX, Dolby Cinema, Real D 3D, ScreenX, and 4DX formats. Along the way to that date, the release had been rescheduled twice, originally targeting July 26, 2024, then shifted to December 20, 2024, and briefly to July 25, 2025, before ultimately landing on its May date. It closed out Phase 5 of the MCU as that saga's final installment. In an unusual marketing maneuver, Marvel rebranded the film as the New Avengers immediately following its opening weekend, consistent with the reveal embedded in the story itself. The studio released promotional video of the cast physically tearing away the Thunderbolts logo from a poster to unveil the new Avengers underneath. Updated billboards and theater marquees to match, and issued new poster artwork under the revised title. Schreier said that revealing and embracing the new title felt like the natural culmination of a plan that had effectively begun the moment the asterisk was added to the marketing. Disney was careful to clarify that the film hadn't been formally retitled in any administrative sense. The studio described it as simply spelling out what the asterisk had always implied, and ticketing platforms continued to list the film under its original title even as promotional materials switched over. Entertainment Weekly's Sydney Bucksbaum suggested this made Thunderbolts the first film deliberately planned well in advance to change its title days after release purely for storytelling purposes. The rebranding stunt generated a fresh round of press coverage in the days immediately following release, effectively giving the film a second wave of publicity right as its opening weekend numbers were being reported and analyzed. Because the title switch had been engineered from the very earliest pitch meetings, Schreier's original idea to use the asterisk as a placeholder had, by design, always been building toward this exact reveal. The maneuver was widely read within the industry as an unusually long term piece of marketing planning for a major studio release rather than a reactive decision made in response to how the film had performed. The fact that ticketing platforms continued listing the film under its original name created a small but persistent point of confusion for moviegoers checking showtimes in the weeks that followed, with several outlets publishing explainer pieces clarifying that Thunderbolts and the New Avengers referred to the same film rather than a rushed sequel or re release. The episode became something of a case study cited by entertainment journalists covering franchise marketing strategy. both for its novelty and for the tension it illustrated between a film's official, legally registered title and the more flexible, narrative driven branding a studio can apply after release. Home Media Thunderbolts became available for digital download on July 1, 2025, followed by physical releases on Ultra HD Blu-ray, Standard Blu-ray, and DVD on July 29. Every home media edition carries the combined title Thunderbolts: The New Avengers and includes two deleted scenes, a gag reel, a director's audio commentary track, and a set of behind the scenes featurettes. The film reached Disney Plus on August 27, 2025. Sales performance varied by market and format. In the United Kingdom, the film debuted at number 2 on the official film chart for the week ending July 9, before slipping to number 8 by the week ending July 30. It then climbed steadily to number 6 the following week, then to number 1 for the week ending August 13, and held that top position through the week ending August 20, before falling to number 3 the following week and number 10 the week after that. In the United States, Thunderbolt finished the year ranked 10th overall on Fandango at Home's chart of digital sales and rentals, and 4th on the platform's list of the year's top action films. On physical media, the film debuted at number 1 on Circana Videoscan's combined DVD and Blu-ray sales chart for the week ending August 2, as well as topping the separate Blu-ray and 4K Ultra HD charts individually. High definition formats made up 74% of first week sales, split between 35% standard Blu-ray and 39% 4K Ultra HD. The film held its number 1 position on the combined chart and the standalone Blu-ray chart the following week, though its 4K Ultra HD share dropped 20 percentage points to 19% of unit sales, even as standard Blu-ray's share grew to 43%, pushing the title down to number 2 on the dedicated 4K chart. By the week ending August 16, the movie had dropped to number 3 on the combined chart after 2 weeks at the top, while holding at number 2 on both the Blu-ray and 4K Ultra HD charts individually, with high definition formats again accounting for about 74% of that week's unit sales. Looking at the year as a whole through October 2025, Thunderbolts ranked 4th in year-to-date disc sales on Circana's tracking. Across the full 2025 calendar year, it placed 5th among the year's top-selling combined DVD and Blu-ray titles, carrying a sales index of 38.03 relative to the year's single best-selling release. Blu-ray formats made up 68% of its total unit sales, including a 30% share attributable specifically to 4K Ultra HD editions. It also ranked 4th among the year's top-selling standalone Blu-ray discs and 10th among top-selling 4K Ultra HD Blu-rays. On the streaming side, analytics firm Flix Patrol, which tracks daily video on demand charts and streaming rankings across international markets, reported that Thunderbolt became the most streamed film on Disney Plus within the United States on its first day of availability and the third most streamed film worldwide that same day. Samba TV, a firm that aggregates viewership data from a panel of smart televisions and content providers, estimated the film had been watched in roughly 449,000 households during its first 6 days on digital platforms. Nielsen Media Research, which tracks streaming activity on a sample of US television screens, reported that the film logged 702 million minutes of viewing between August 25 and 31, making it the third most streamed film that week. In the following week, from September 1 through 7, it logged 368 million minutes, placing fifth among films for that period. Taken together, their home media and streaming figures painted a picture somewhat at odds with the film's disappointing theatrical run. Strong initial digital demand, a genuinely dominant opening on physical formats, and sustained streaming viewership well into the autumn following its Disney Plus debut. Industry observers noted that the high proportion of premium format purchases with 4K Ultra HD and standard Blu-ray consistently outselling DVD across nearly every tracked week, suggested the film had connected with a dedicated core audience willing to pay a premium for a high quality home viewing experience, even if that enthusiasm hadn't fully translated into the opening weekend ticket sales the studio had originally projected. The inclusion of behind the scenes material such as the director's commentary track and the deleted scenes gave fans additional insight into a production that had, as documented throughout its lengthy development period, undergone substantial rewrites and character shifts before reaching its final form, and the gag reel offered a lighter coda to a film that had otherwise been praised for tackling unusually heavy material for the genre. Reception box office Thunderbolts grossed $190.3 million across the United States and Canada, plus a further 192.2 million internationally, for a worldwide total of $382.4 million, a figure that ranks among the lowest of any MCU release. C. Variety's Rebecca Rubin reported that, given production costs of $180 million and a marketing spend of roughly $100 million, both on the leaner end for an MCU release, the film would have needed to gross an essentially unreachable $425 million worldwide simply to break even. Rubin and colleague Brent Lang later grouped Thunderbolts together with that year's other two MCU releases, Captain America, Brave New World, and the Fantastic Four. First Steps, describing all three as commercial disappointments amid what they characterized as a difficult stretch for the studio. Feige, addressing the film's underperformance publicly, attributed it partly to audiences mistakenly believing they needed to have watched Marvel's Disney Plus series to follow the story, and said, in hindsight, the studio should have done more to reassure viewers that prior homework wasn't required. pre-release tracking had painted a considerably rosier picture. In mid-April 2025, industry analysts projected a domestic opening weekend somewhere between $63 million and $77 million, with 70 million cited as a rough target figure. By the end of that month, projections had shifted slightly upward to a range of $70 million to $75 million domestically and 160 million to 175 million worldwide, with a handful of more optimistic domestic estimates reaching as high as $80 million to $90 million. Actual results landed closer to the middle of those ranges. The film earned $31.5 million on its domestic opening day, which included $11.5 million from Thursday preview screenings, and went on to post a $74.3 million domestic opening weekend, combined with $86.1 million from international markets. That gave the film a worldwide opening of $160.1 million, of which roughly $20 million came specifically from IMAX screens. The film's second weekend brought in $33.1 million domestically, enough to keep it atop the box office chart. Its 55% weekend to weekend decline was viewed favorably relative to other recent MCU releases, comparing well against the steeper 68% second weekend drop posted earlier that year by Captain America: Brave New World. By its third weekend, the film had slipped to $17 million, a further 52% decline, and dropped to second place behind the newly released horror sequel Final Destination Bloodlines. The gap between the film's strong reviews and its comparatively soft commercial performance became a recurring talking point in trade coverage throughout the summer of 2025. Analysts pointed to a number of contributing factors beyond Feig's own explanation about Disney Plus prerequisites: a crowded release calendar, general softness at the domestic box office for mid-budget franchise films that year, and lingering audience fatigue after a long run of MCU releases with mixed reputations. Because the film carried a comparatively restrained budget by MCU standards, its underperformance was somewhat less dramatic in absolute terms than some of the studio's costlier disappointments, though trade writers were nonetheless consistent in describing its finances as disappointing given the strength of the reviews and the goodwill the marketing campaign had generated. The film's trajectory, a strong opening weekend, unusually resilient holds in its second and third weeks, but a worldwide total that still fell well short of the break even threshold cited by Variety, was frequently used by industry commentators as a case study in the disconnect between critical reception and box office return for legacy franchise filmmaking in the mid 2020s. Critical response. Critical reaction to Thunderbolts skewed strongly positive from the outset, and reviewers frequently framed it as a course correction for a franchise that had drawn increasing skepticism in recent years. On the aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, 88% of 381 critics gave the film a positive rating with an average score of 7.1 out of 10. The site's consensus summary praised the ensemble's chemistry and singled out Florence Pugh as its standout performer, framing the film as a return to the storytelling instincts behind some of the MCU's stronger earlier entries. Metacritic, which calculates a weighted average across a smaller pool of outlets, scored the film 68 out of 100 based on 53 reviews, translating to a rating the site classifies as generally favorable. Multiple outlets specifically noted that this made Thunderbolts one of the best reviewed MCU films by Metacritic's measure in the years following Avengers Endgame, with some observers comparing its score favorably to Spider-Man No Way Home. Recurring themes across the reviews included praise for the film's character work, its visual craft, and its handling of practical action sequences, alongside particular attention to how directly the story engaged with mental illness. An unusually candid choice for a mainstream superhero tentpole. Who and Louis Pullman's performances drew especially consistent praise. Audience reaction tracked closely with the critical response. CinemaScore polling from the film's opening weekend produced an average grade of A minus on the service's A plus to F scale, while post-tracks exit surveys showed an average of 4.5 out of 5 stars, with 74% of respondents saying they would definitely recommend the film to others. Individual reviews varied in emphasis even where they landed on similar overall verdicts. NPR's Bob Mondello reviewed the film favorably, describing it as an effective mix of misfit mercenary storytelling and pop psychology. Jake Coyle of the Associated Press awarded the film 3 out of 4 stars, praising the strengths of the ensemble cast, Wendell Pierce included, and crediting Pooh with carrying much of the film's momentum. The Hollywood Reporter's David Rooney called it a gratifyingly fresh and soulful addition to the Marvel catalog built around Pugh and Stan. Nicholas Barber of BBC Culture likewise responded positively, highlighting the character driven approach and Pugh's central performance, and noting that the film felt more grounded and emotionally resonant than many recent Marvel releases while still delivering expected doses of action and comedy. Beyond Pooh and Pullman, the wider ensemble drew consistently favorable notice, with several critics remarking that the film succeeded specifically because it functioned as a true ensemble piece rather than a star vehicle padded out with supporting players. Stan's more restrained, word-weary take on Bucky Barnes was frequently praised as a naturalistic anchor for the group, while Harbour's Red Guardian continued to draw comparisons to his earlier comedic turn in Black Widow, with critics noting the character's blustery bravado was given room to coexist with real vulnerability. Russell's John Walker was often highlighted as a character who could easily have curdled into a one note antagonist, but instead retained a flawed, sympathetic core, and John Comman's more controlled, confident version of Ghost was cited as a meaningful evolution from her introduction in Ant-Man and the Wasp.